The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. This was a really fun way to start off the E group of orchestrations for this challenge. And yeah, I mean, just very simple oboe, first oboe, doing the alternating pitch. Now, it goes on for quite a while. Now, oboes can continue to just play and play and play, but the funny thing about oboe is that it can play for longer than the player will run out of oxygen. Do you know what I'm saying? So usually, like say with a clarinet or a bassoon, the player will get to the point where they've used up their breath and they're starting to run out of air and they need to breathe to replenish their lungs. So they'll stop and they'll take a breath. Okay. But in the case of the oboist can have the air, like they have such a small air passage, especially in a soft passage, that they could just continue to play, but like the air in their lungs is starting to get staler and staler, right? They could actually, they could pass out. Do you know what I mean? So what I would really recommend here is trading off, as you might have seen in other scores. Like the first bar, or you could do it this way. This might be a cool way of doing it. Just have one player focus on one pattern, right? So you'd have play the first two baton strokes, right? And then you have the second player come in and play play on the third baton stroke for the conductor, right? So, or you could like split it up into like go back and forth between the bars. All right, and that's what I would do for the oboe as well, because this really does go on for quite a while. Yeah, and you have this lovely ascending pizzicato kind of going across, dividing up 2 bars of 9/8 into almost like 3 bars of 6/8, with the way that it is paced. And then, of course, this lovely idea here of having the 2 against the 3, having the tuplet against the compound time, and that works really nicely too. It has a nice, just sort of nice contrary energy. As far as the division of duties here is, like, you really have an awful lot of weight on the lower part of the pattern. Do you know what I'm saying? You have the oboe carrying this particular pitch, right? The B flat and the A flat, and then kind of like the the left hand interpretation of the left hand pattern from the piano. First, you've got it in clarinet, and then you've got it in bassoon, right? Like a carbon copy, an octave lower. All right. Okay. Well, that's all good. But did you notice how you basically could not even hear the flute at all in that mock-up? Well, your ears are telling you the truth there, right? It doesn't matter that all of these elements are marked pianissimo. The bustling sound is still going to be too loud for the flute in this register, all right? So you'd have to mark this like mezzo forte to get it to stand out. Now, you don't have to do that with the horn, because the horn has got such great powers of projection that it will be fine. Now, of course, saying 1 solo P, the player will just play out anyway, so you don't really have to mark it up. But what your ears are telling you in the mock-up is pretty true. Is that the flute is, if you have just these simple staccatos, like the staccatos are blending right in with the pizzicato and everything else, and also the resonance of what's below is blotting out the flute. So you really would have to very much indicate that this was going to be heard. So I would say probably mezzo forte, and just really to stand way out, in the foreground. Otherwise, it's just going to disappear. And kind of fun to have the contrast of that timbre be the horn, right? But other than those couple of points, there's really not a whole lot on this first page that doesn't work. I mean, it's fine. It would have been kind of cool to have a bigger orchestra, maybe more voices at work, working together. You've got all of these winds. You're just really only using the first player, right? So some of these pizzicato notes could have been doubled, or you could have brought in some percussion to help out the pizzicato. Yeah, because it's just really octaves in the seconds and the violas, but it's still a cool idea. Here on the second page, we see the kind of completion of that approach, right? Just all pretty much as it was before. And now we get into this. I'm seeing this a lot. Like the first two baton strokes, like starts off in the winds or strings with just a couple of instruments, and then suddenly there's this huge swoop up with everybody joining in. Right, you've got the cellos at an octave below the violas. Then you've got the second violins joining up with the first violins, and then you've got like everybody else just suddenly swooping into it. And I'm just wondering whether or not people could have started here with like pianissimo crescendo, right, or even triple P crescendo to make it just really feel like it wasn't just suddenly joining in a big jolt. Right? There's like no way that you can stop that sudden introduction of energy here from jolting, right? So it's not a smooth transition at all. If you really wanted a smooth transition, you would mark this down to like pianissimo, and then just have them suddenly come out like then the energy of pushing into this bar is what is interesting, rather than the just big jolt on that one stroke, right? Okay. Pretty cool. Good use of the tenor clef here for bassoon, but probably not all that necessary. See, you're going up to a G here, G flat here. I mean, like when you get into this, like you should stop the okay, here you could use it and then put in a bass clef right here. Okay, that's what I would do. And then from there on, all you need is just bass clef going forward, because these low notes in tenor clef are kind of, they're just like the player can figure them out, but it's really better to think of notes below, I would say, like below F or G in the tenor clef, or well, let's go a little farther, below E in the tenor clef, like this lower E down here in the tenor clef. I would say just go back to bass clef, because that's really not on the tenor range anymore. The lowest line of the tenor clef is a D, and that is like the beginning of the tenor range, right? So like a passage that kind of starts in D and kind of goes around, goes all the way up to G, A, even B flat. That's all very characteristic, but like, throwing in ledger lines below the tenor clef is just not that cool. That's, why do you need to do that? You don't need to do that. So anyways, it's at this point, actually right at this point you could go back, but I would say go back right here to bass clef. All right, and then, we've got that same kind of thing, unison, the trills, the A2, all blending together with the strings, and that all works pretty good. And just a little punch of bass and horn, right? And you know what? You can get a punchy accent without the staccato if all you have is just like a single eighth note. You just put the accent on it. The force of the accent implies the staccato sometimes. And I would say at this speed, that's what you would get. All right? So you don't always have to put in like a staccato. The staccato can make it feel too short sometimes, like depending on the hall that you're in, right? So, but the players know how to adjust that. And then, I mean, I actually liked the way that this was all scored. This was very cool, and like the drop out of the texture here, and then joining in on the trill, that was nice. There could have been more nuance here. Do you know what I'm saying? Like rather than just leaving the um, leaving the wind section without any kind of dynamics or hairpins or anything. But it was still pretty cool. And then this was nice. The way that the winds carried their texture over into this part, and you were just left with a little bit of bassoon and second violin, and then these horn, this little horn harmony right in here. So I thought that was all pretty effective. So so pretty good work there. And yeah, just it's. I mean, you're gonna need some tweaking to this, and you might have had ideas to take it further and stuff like that. So I would say just work with the score a little bit, but all in all, it's a pretty good effort. Really like this. So you can hear with that sound set that this next entry by Arne is very highly spiced. That I think the sounds are just a little not I don't want to say low quality, but just the formation of them doesn't really have a whole lot of depth. Do you know what I mean? The execution is just very, and it's very like in your face, and doesn't have a lot of presence, and is a little tinny in places, and that clarinet sounded like a saxophone, but it's still really really cool. I mean, I totally got the idea. Um, I've talked a little bit about this before, so I won't go into too much detail here, but it sort of seems like this. The trading off, like every other baton stroke, is a bit fiddly for the players. Do you know what I mean? It might be a little easier on them to trade off every bar, right? So that they really have a chance to completely finish an idea, and or just like they don't have to just continually bounce off of each other in ways that might not overlap very well. But of course, you've got these. You kind of want the way that you're scoring. You're throwing in these intervals, right? So if these intervals kind of evolved out of the idea of dovetailing, then I'd say you could just drop them. But if they're something that you intended from the beginning, then I guess you just have to keep them and just deal with the way that these voices are just continually playing off each other, which, as I said before, is a bit fiddly for the players. It's a bit, it doesn't really have a very natural groove to it. Though the players can develop it over time. They have enough experience with the piece. Cool bassoon part right in here. And, I do like the triple octave of flute, oboe, and bassoon. It's a very Brahmsian sound. It's very cool. Now, it's kind of interesting though, that celesta sound. Did you notice how it sounded a little bit like, I don't know, like a kind of like a cowbell or almost like metallic, almost like a tin cup, right? Rather than like really jingling bells. So I don't know. You might want to look to see. I'm not sure what application this is. Maybe this is Sibelius. If it's Sibelius, then you could try out Note Performer, which is like it just has very authentic sounds. And of course, like a lot of people will take issue with them too. Not be happy with the sound, but yeah. But generally speaking, probably get a better, like a more realistic proportion, right? It's not really about the sounds being authentic. It's more about the proportion of the sounds having an effect that tells you what's going to happen more realistically in a concert situation, right? Like all of this harp is going to be okay, but like P is the wrong dynamic, right? You should really mark this like F, like so this should be forte, right? And then when you get to here bispigliando, this is not realistic, okay? At least for being heard, right? You want to do an enharmonic tremolo, right, between F sharp and G flat. So it's like you're quivering on that one pitch, right? And the thing about it is that bispigliando literally means whispering, and that is the effect that you get. So like you have these big sweeps. Like if everybody was playing pianissimo and the brass were playing like really softly, then this might almost work. But if you just listen to bispigliando being used in the planets, you can barely hear it, and everybody is just staying out of the way, and those harps are right there in the front, and they are playing their guts out, and you still can't hear them very well. You just kind of hear this kind of tiny little glitter in the background. Well, there is no background here because you're using trumpets. You're throwing in trumpet there. You've got this little wiggling idea here. Very nice, transferring this idea over from celesta to clarinets. I think that's very cool. And you've got, sforzando, Now this is completely unnecessary. Sforzando piano, right? What is happening after this? Like you don't have this continuing on, right? So SF is good enough. Then you just mark P on the next pitch, right? Because there is no, like if you were to carry this forward, but you've got a staccatissimo, right? So that is the end of the pitch. There is no P to cut down to, right? So here you are doing a portamento from this F sharp to that F sharp, okay, and you are ending up just like really just bouncing off the end of it, and that is the sforzando, and that is the end of it, right? There is no P to continue on to, right? So like when you have like sforzando piano, that means that you are going like this, right? You have an accented loud note followed by a soft note. So there is no soft note following this. So just get rid of the P. It's just a sforzando, right? Yeah, and then so you've got sul tasto, nat. Norm is better than nat because I don't know. I just feel it is universal to more languages. Normal, normale, I just feel it. Yeah, I get it better. Ord is another one. Ordinario, ordinary. I mean, nat works, but yeah. So this is kind of cool in here. The little brass scoring, the little the little line on top of the horn, but pianissimo, right? And then you've got these accents going downhill. Once you get up to this F sharp, you are no longer pianissimo. You're more like kind of a kind of barely held back mezzo piano or even mezzo forte, depending on the player, right? So just like the higher you get, you're already getting near the top of the limit of what could be played pianissimo, a true pianissimo. You can have a relative pianissimo. You know what I mean? Just like, it's pianissimo compared to the other thing, right? So just some stuff to work out here in terms of balance, right? And I wouldn't be starting a trumpet line mezzo piano, right? Just like I would say either piano or mezzo forte, right? Or just like maybe do mezzo forte on this marcato and then just drop back down to piano here. Anyhow, so there's some really great, interesting ideas in here, but just the balance needs to be worked out a bit more. Then we've got that other episode. And I feel this is really where the fun begins. We got the tambourine, we got the rolled timpani, we got this like cool little roll on the eighth note, which is just really, that's going to be barely able to get more than a couple, than a few tremoloed pitches out of this before you get to this ba-da-bum, right? Ba-da-bum. It's just barely there. Yeah, but yeah, and we've seen this before. Boom, brr, and that not this, but then boom, crash. That's very cool. It's kind of interesting. You've got kind of a mini note on your cymbal crash. Maybe it's because there's so many things around it, or maybe just my eyes are getting bad from looking at too many scores all day long. But yeah, but I love this sort of almost hodgepodge of interacting ideas. It's very cubistic, you know. But I feel it all works pretty well. Yeah, but like you're not going to get a true pianissimo on that high F sharp. Like maybe piano mezzo piano, like I said before. But yeah, it's not that realistic of a the same thing here. Yeah, I would also mark what this is right at the beginning here, like at the page turn. Okay, yeah, and then very strong, the trills there, and these notes picking up after that. That's all very cool. Yeah, yeah. And then this punch right here with trumpet going up to A sharp. Yeah, that works pretty nicely. Yeah, so I don't have huge problems here, and I think that the percussion is very interesting, and the proportions are quite cool. I mean, this would sound great with with live players or with a good sound set. It just would really come to life. Um, and yeah, and then you've got this pluck here, leading to octave flutes, and then this intriguing, like, yeah, the stopped horns plus the clarinets and bass clarinets sort of sounded like saxophones a bit. Maybe it was the stopped horns that sounded like saxophones in the sound set. I don't know. Anyways, look, I've been talking a lot about sound sets in this particular round of evaluations, this particular year of evaluations, just because I'm realizing more and more that just that they're pretty important to a lot of orchestrators out there, and just because of all the demos that they have to do because of clients that can't read scores. Now, a lot of us are developing, and or developed to the point at which we can look at the score and get a pretty good idea of what it sounds like, or a perfect idea of what it sounds like. But most clients don't know that, right? They don't have that ability. They haven't developed that. So you have to make mock-ups all the time. And a good mock-up can just be the difference between getting a green light or back to the drawing board for a project. So yeah, so that's why I'm kind of thinking more and more about how people could like maybe get a bit more of an edge with better sound set. And I'm hearing quite a few that are a bit on the rough side, a bit tinier, a bit more shallow in their depth, and it's a shame because like some of the ideas are just so compelling, right? That are being used. So, anyways, just a thought. I'm not condemning anybody's sound set, but I'm just trying to think. If there's a practical, professional reason to upgrade, I would say on a lot of these that it should be taken. Okay, and having said that, let's go on to our next entry. And now we have Daniel's orchestration. And this also has a lot of cool effects to it. And obviously, Daniel thought a lot about different elements and different parts of this, right? Now, the first thing that I'm going to do, though, is question this particular thing. Okay, so Daniel, in the first place, you probably know by now if you've read some of my other writings or lectures or whatever. I've got a video about this too on string bowing. is that, you shouldn't be the one to tell the players how to bow unless you have a really specific idea about how something should be bowed, right? Okay. So right here, this is like, I mean, maybe you are a string player and you disagree with me, and if so, then I respect that. Okay. But I want you to think about the dynamic arc of this passage. All right. So we've got a pretty obvious up bow here, okay, for this crescendo, and then down bow, right, and then up bow, then down, up, right? So down loses power just naturally, right, unless you force it to gain, like which you would do here. So like, and then you can just go up bow, just punch it, which is also a very like a up bow is a lot spikier of a sound. It's like it's got a jump. It works really, really great with these kinds of accents. There's like, or staccato. There's just almost no reason to do this down bow. Right, down bow gives you less staccato, more tenuto, right? And yet you want staccato here with a down bow, so it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, right? So it's just like the natural thing to do is down, and just allow the bow to lose some power, which helps with the dynamics, going diminuendo, and then punch it right at the end with an up bow, and then it gets the position of the bow ready to just do it again. Down bow, down, up, down, up. And see here, you marked it again. And so I don't know why you got it backwards there. But anyways, I'm just pointing out that like maybe don't worry about that, right? Don't worry about that feature because it's something that will stick out immediately to the concertmaster and the conductor, and they'll go like, well, why did he do that? And then they'll want to ask you things. Hands will go up in the rehearsal, and then you lose like 30 seconds of whatever, or just me sitting here blabbing about it that you didn't need to hear, right? So anyway, so going back to this, it's kind of interesting that you say bring out after a diminuendo, right? So like you go mezzo forte, diminuendo, bring out, right? You could have just, da da da. I don't know. It just seems strange after a diminuendo mark. But generally speaking, I like this whole idea in here. Okay, so like this, you got just this kind of almost like sitting on a beach ball, right? You got this little pianissimo tenuto kind of chord here with your trombones with a triangle strike and the pizzicato below it. That's a really cool idea. You're just kind of like adding emphasis to the downbeat, and then you do this really cool thing, which is second, third stroke, and then second stroke hold, right? And then which brings in the lower heavy brass, and then we have the same thing happening here, adding timpani and so on, and then second timpani. So, and I also like the fact that you underemphasize the downbeat here, right? Whereas as the melody starts, those are all just really cool ideas that like keep the music from sounding too regular and kind of too much like everybody else, right? So you might have been thinking, how could I make this sound as different as possible from everybody else's orchestration? And I think you kind of achieved that. There's like not a whole lot that is reminiscent. I mean, this of course, obviously. I mean, I did that and a lot of other orchestrators as well, but you're trying to be not obvious, and that's very cool. So look, like people have been scoring 1 3 2 4, like 1 3 at the top, 2 4 at the bottom. Okay, and here this is done correctly as 1 2 and 3 4. So just notice what's happening here in the scoring of just like this first chord, right? We've got an F third, and then we've got a C sixth, right? And then the high horns are on the top, and then you have the low horns taking the bottom two pitches. So that's perfect, right? So yeah, so just like it's like a formula, don't mess with it, right? Now here, when we go on further, like we have these, we have this little passage. This will work the way that it's scored. Okay, this is the place where it would be better to have a G flat third in both staves, right? And then a G natural third going up to here with the first and the third playing this top F, right? Because they've got the most control. This top F and then the C and everything else. But yeah, it would be better to incorporate the second here into the what you've written here as the second part into the third part, right? If A2 is continuing on. However, if this is just like first horn and then intended to be another horn, like maybe the third, in that case, what I would say is that you should make this the first and the second, right? Sharing this staff and then having all the horns come in here, because that you'll get more intimacy, partnership there in this sort of trickier place. All right. Okay, so back to some fun features of this scoring. I like the Bartók pizzicato, a little snap, and it's nice that you didn't force everybody to do Bartók pizzicato, because it's that snap will be heard across the orchestra just in the double basses because they got the nice long strings, right? So it's a nice percussive effect. And, it makes it snappy, literally. Now, here you've chosen to mark your note heads as X's. You don't need to do that. There's like absolutely zero need to mark them as X's, right? The X denotes a particular technique. And I know sometimes people just try to do more percussion as X note heads. But you don't need to do that. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to have the X note head for percussion parts. It's better, the standard is to just have a regular, just a regular standard note head. That's really what I would prefer and I would want to see as a score reader. And then a nice light timpani at the beginning, sitting under this brass, and nice horn writing right in there, as I mentioned before. Now you have this this muted trumpet ending on the B flat. That's very cool as well. All right, and yeah, that is going to be a pretty intense flaming sound. This high G flat trilled sforzando fortissimo, right? And and these big reaching, like you got that A2. So if I can just suggest something, the more balanced approach here would be to double the second and third trumpet, and just to have a single high trumpet there, right? And this is actually a tip that I will be scoring soon, will be writing soon. I'm just got my head in scoring. And that is that it's really better, like the higher the part, unless you're like doing jazz combo type stuff, the higher the part, the better and clearer and more in the classical style that it sounds if that part is simply just like, stands out solo, right? I would say like anything above like D or E in the staff sounds better just as a single note. And if you want to double things, double the lower note rather than the upper note, right? And you just get a stronger sound and clearer sound, right? Like the higher you double things, the more danger there is that that the tone will split or will not be perfectly in intonation, clearly in intonation together, and so on, right? So it's just like it just is better. And here you have a kind of a smear down with your horns, but not with the rest of the players. And actually, like a smear, this is a G flat. It would be so much easier to do with the trombones, right? If you wanted a very clear smear of just down a half step to a staccato. But I mean, it'll work on horns. It just doesn't have the same kind of pizzazz. So anyway, so look, a really cool, interesting score, and there are a lot of features that I could, a lot more features I could go over. But yeah, just really enjoyable. And thanks for sharing this with us, Daniel. I really appreciate it. And it's great to have an entry from you. And, like I've been saying all along, just like please enter the next challenge. it would be great to see your efforts in that particular score that I've got coming up, especially since you take this textural approach here. And with that, on to our next entrant for this group of orchestrations. Our fourth entry for this group is by Joey, and we've just had a couple of very splendiferous, very like colorful, kaleidoscopic entries go by. Okay, and what's great about this is it's like a palate cleanser, right? It says, okay, well that's all great, but look at this very basic approach that really lets you get to the root of what the music is saying in a just in a direct way, right? So it's not to say that one approach is better than the other, but it's just that it's great to have that contrast of like a very direct approach as opposed to the more just the more colorful, some somewhat slightly randomized in texture, from time to time. Just that the really wide variations of texture. Yeah, so we have our we have some flute, right, going to octaves, bringing in the clarinet, first clarinet, and oboe. And what's nice here is that Joey has sort of thought ahead to supply trade-offs, and then some breaths here, so that the first player can come back and then play a little snatch of decoration over the melody and the strings. And yeah, and this is really nice the way that this is done here, continuing the pattern, and then throwing in these 2/8 in the first violin, just getting kind of preparing the ear for the pulse of the last bit of direct melody right in here for the bar, right? And then just some support from below from bassoons, which is wise because it sort of catches the overtones of the strings right in there and helps make them richer, right, without necessarily doubling them directly. So yeah, so that's that's all pretty cool, I would say. And there's just plenty of place to breathe for everybody. That's also a pretty important thing. Atu or first bassoon, either would have worked, right? And it's kind of nice to have a piece that is just like more directly loud, right? So mezzo forte, going to forte, yeah, that's all fine. Yeah, I mean, it's once again sort of mezzo dynamic, but like since we're actually headed in a louder direction, that it kind of all works out. I think you could have nuanced these upper voices or these voices right in here, just like to kind of make them diminuendo at the end of each of these little beam groups. But still, same thing here. You could have had a little fortissimo diminuendo, so it would kind of match the arc of what's going on in the strings, right? But still pretty workable, pretty usable. And we sort of see the end of that approach coming up here in bar 7. Now we go to the sort of scrub-a-dub part. Yeah, where we kind of get into this, bringing in that lower voice here and so on. I'm not going to say that this is really problematic here. Like these faster notes higher in the double bass range, they're totally doable, but they're, it's not the most elegant thing. And like when you have the cellos doing basically the same exact pitches in a much smoother, more manageable way, it might even be better to just play the F and then then come in on the D flat and everything else, or even just doesn't always have to double every single pitch, right? And it can sort of lighten the bass a little bit if you don't have it completely doubling all the way through, but just like sort of adding stress to the main parts. All right, so that would be one thing. Here you've got a very, it's not so much that that the technique is at all dodgy or that the notes are at all too high, but it's just more that it really adds a lot of heaviness, right? And you've also at the same time you've got you've got clarinets and and both bassoons like just chugging along, right, with everybody. I mean, it's nice to take a lower approach, don't get me wrong. And then of course we've got the second violins standing in as the sole instrument in the original register of the right hand. Okay, but I mean it's still all fine. This is neat, but you have to understand, punching this note at sforzando pretty much kills the trill for the other instruments when there aren't more high winds or whatever to carry on, right? So if it's just strings and low winds doubling the lower strings, then this trill, in the upper strings is just not going to, it just cannot compete with the strength of the trumpet and the horns, right? That punch is just gonna wipe out the trill, and you can actually hear some of that in the mock-up too. It's just like you hear a little bit of trill, but it's very vague. And also just being aware that trills on very low pitches just really they have a very not a coarse effect, but they're just they don't have the same kind of flow as higher trills, right? It's kind of like if you've ever done like some Bach where there's like trilling in the left hand and then there's like the right hand is playing over it. It just you can see that it's almost like a timpani doing a roll, right? It has that kind of lower sound disturbance, right? So it's not the most smooth sound, right? It kind of almost makes the whole orchestra quiver when we are throwing in trills to like the lowest pitches, right? And I mean there is some of that already in the Mussorgsky, in the original Mussorgsky piano part, to having the trilling in both hands, but we're taking it down lower and lower here. So so just something to think about. Not to say it's good or bad, but just like thinking of the proportions and the the essence of each part. But I mean, it just feels, if I were to have one overall critique, that even though I've said, hey, it's great that this piece is stronger overall, and that's a nice contrast from everybody starting piano. There just really is so much mezzo forte, right? I mean, I'm thinking like right here, you could just really commit to forte from the beginning of the phrase, and then really go places, right? And then this release here means more, right? Yeah. But I mean, this is totally allowable here. Sforzando in this note, and then the other notes starting piano, right, in the first oboe and first violins, they don't have to worry about that accent. They're just going to come in and do their thing, and then they come out of the loud sound, right? So much of this is just like, how is it performed, where is it performed, who are the players, and so on. How big is the hall, and so on. So you just have to kind of think of a more general kind of player and situation, venue, everything else. And this is just like pretty workable. So yeah, so it's a more scaled down version, right? Not necessarily, and actually mine was too, to a certain degree. I did use some coloristic effects and everything else, but But yeah, mine was also like a more basic approach with less instruments necessarily being involved. And there's a lot to be said for that too. Even like I said, even though there are some really wonderful coloristic experiments where just really a lot of bits and pieces that seem like they're just put anywhere, like almost like a tapestry, but the cumulative effect is also quite intriguing. So but all the same, this is pretty strong as well, as a basic approach. So there's a lot of tinkering that you should do to this, but it's still a pretty cool score, and I really enjoyed it, Joey. So thanks, and just really looking forward to the next thing that you bring to the table. All right, hopefully next year's orchestration challenge. Now, next to last entry here, we've got Oscar's incredibly dramatic interpretation of this. This seamstress is doing something epic. Forget about sewing. She is driving a team of 20 horses to go rescue somebody. It just really has that wonderful impulse, and I really love the just huge clanging triangle sound here. Um, yeah, so it's got that kind of pulse that kind of taking over the piece a little bit, and then just the really really impulsive winds, and I mean there's there's there are some things that can suggest about this, and there's some things that I can observe, but mainly it's just fun to watch Oscar go to town here, and just really use a lot of his just kind of imagination and natural abilities and everything else. It's just very very fun. Yeah, and of course it's by introducing the B flat here, it really becomes like um, a piece in minor, right, and just has that kind of driving effect. Just one kind of question here, Oscar, and that is, did you intend for this to be G flat rather than the G natural? That's in the that would be more like it's like there's a G natural in the right hand here, and also like the we also have to deal with that D natural there in the violas, right? So it kind of has a very spooky effect. But I feel that if you really did intend this to be G flat, you should have put like a parentheses accidental here, right? Just to let the conductor know. And then that could just be corrected in rehearsal if you had actually got it wrong, right? If you had intended a G natural. Um, Anyways, but yeah, just very exciting, and and nicely proportioned as well, right? We've got bits of oboe doubling the violins. Kind of interesting. I'm seeing this in a few interpretations to go down to F instead of up to the F. But it's really no problem for the first oboist to jump up and hit that F. It's just as easy as it would be for the violins to grab that F. But maybe you didn't want that note to mix. I don't know. And then we've got a combination of clarinet and oboe. Now I'm assuming that you intend this to be first clarinet right here, right? This should have been marked 1, or you should have thrown in some rests or something just to tell us which voice it was. Okay. Yeah, here with this notation style, I would really prefer, like if I were a copyist or whatever, if I were publishing this, I would want to pull these eighth notes down, a little bit, so there's more space there, so they don't kind of look like spiky note heads. Yeah, and then just kind of more of the same, kind of just very similar bits, but yeah, I like this, grabbing this F on the second time, right? Or D, sorry, this high D on the second time, like going up, right? So you kind of could have done something the same here as going up to the D on the oboe as well. Anyways, if you'd wanted a contrast there, right? Because of these lower notes on the second baton stroke. All right. Okay. And then going on, we go to that sort of scrubbing part, all strings in a quadruple octave, and it just really makes it very, very dramatic when you've got sort of broadcasting like going into this. And notice like the pianissimo to mezzo forte, right? Mezzo piano to, but see, like here I don't like this, mezzo piano to mezzo forte. Just start piano and go to mezzo forte. Like mezzo piano to mezzo forte is like, like I said before, it's from like blah to bleh, right? It's just not much of an increase. And considering that the harp always gets buried in everything and you're going into this big splashy part, I would say start from piano and go to F, right? Just make it really simple. Yeah, and then you've got your crescendo here, like from piano, right? All these textures. They sound very grand, actually, in the in the mock-up. But yeah, so crescendo to mezzo forte, going to sforzando, right? I mean, look, it just could have been crescendo to forte, right? It's like it just feels like the punches are being pulled here a bit too much, but yeah. And then we got big old tishing cymbal and a bass drum. Yeah, that all works really great. And then this is nice. The trombones and tuba right in here. And that's a good support for this. I like this. Boom, rest, bip, right? And then that really helps to punctuate. See the advantage here is that the line is extremely clear in the strings, right? The trill and then the downward swoop. That's all incredibly clear, right? And as far as the winds are concerned, we have support leading to the staccato and then a little bit of punch at the end, right? From both players. And notice, forte piano, right? So we have an accented tenuto. So forte piano. So this is a situation where it's like an accent on the beginning, and then it goes down to piano, and then punches at the end, right? On a piano dynamic. So that all works just beautifully. Now this is one of the best orchestrations of this bar so far in the challenge, or just I don't know, best. Good and bad is really subjective, but one of the the most well crafted. Let's put it that way. Okay, and then we just kind of have a repeat of the same thing before. Worked before, it'll work again, and sometimes the repetition works really, just works to the advantage. And then just kind of continuing on with that. Like I notice you're alternating second players with first players. It would be nice if these numbers were bigger. I would just generally advise in scoring situations like this, just to try to have your markings and your instructions as as nice and clear as possible. Like maybe just a thicker font or larger size or something like that. So yeah, and then this big sweep up the glissando up to the ottava. That's all great. Okay, so yeah, so I have no problems with this. Kind of the same approach 3 times in a row, but since it works so perfectly, there's really no issue. And this is cool. Sforzando pianissimo, right? And that is that's great on brass, by the way. It's just a big stab, and then it just dies down to kind of nothing. I almost wonder whether or not this could have slurred to this. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if the horns could have slurred into, excuse me, not horns. If the trombones could have slurred into the horns on an overlapping note, just to kind of keep the texture really, really smooth going through here. That's just a thought. But yeah, and then sforzando piano, increasing to sforzando, and then back. Notice that the accompanying instruments don't hit the accent, right? They just increase a little bit and then go back down. The clarinets are up one dynamic notch so that they blend more evenly with the horns. And also, what could have been done here, Oscar, is you could have had pianissimo and piano in your horns and clarinets, and then probably get like maybe the same exact effect, right? Rather than marking your clarinets to be louder than your strings, mathematically speaking, though that wouldn't be the way it would work out in concert, right? But that's what I prefer here. Probably saying pianissimo, and then maybe this tying or slurring over to an overlapping tone or a dovetailing tone with the horns, which would be marked the same thing, pianissimo, and then a little flush, and then back, and then piano here to match the strings, right? So, anyways, just a small point, but that those are kind of like, you notice that like I might get into the finer points on a score that is more more professionally scored. So I just kind of like pick around the edges a little bit. Whereas like if there's a lot of advice to be given on the basics, then then I go in that direction. But yeah, but like all of these, I absolutely have like zero, like preference. Do you know what I'm saying? In terms of like as an evaluator, I like all levels of experience because that's the challenge for me, right? And to see in the work the emerging personality of the orchestrator is the thing that is the most thrilling to me, right? And when I see like something like this score, which shows a lot of polish, it's because I can see the developed orchestrator on the top, right? I'm like I'm not just seeing the threads or the emergence, but I'm seeing the emerged orchestrator, right? But there's like no, to me, there is no, in terms of the person's worth as an artist, that absolutely makes zero difference to me, right? I'm interested in people growing, right? Not people getting prizes for being brilliant, right? Even though Oscar, this was a great score. So anyhow, with that, I'll continue on with one more score of a very well-known member of the Orchestration Online community, and then we'll call it a day for this round of orchestration evaluations for the E group. All right. Well, I am on a total roll with this particular evaluation. I have been recording many evaluations today. This is, I guess, my 18th in a row, and so I'm going. This is actually the end of my workday, and I'm just feeling jazzed. I just listened to the mock-up once again for Tristan's work, and now Tristan is a pro orchestrator. And he has shared many of his published works in progress, and asked advice and offered perspectives, and it's just really great to have him throw everything into one of these challenges. Now, I mean, unfortunately, as I mentioned a few times before up to this point, I can't. Just to abide by the rules, by the guidelines of this challenge, I can't really evaluate his entire score. But he did share it with everybody on Facebook a couple weeks ago, and it's really a terrific piece of work. It he just really has his own personality as an orchestrator, and he thinks ahead, and he has grand ideas and everything else, and I don't know, at this point I'm kind of wondering whether or not I should take some of these longer evaluations, to just maybe post them, or just ask the composers to make their own videos, and then I can post links to them. That probably would be better. But I mean, this is the kind of thing. Once again, I also would feel bad about sharing an entire orchestration that could and should be published, right? So like if I completely publish it myself right here in this complete form, when Tristan could get it performed or published or something else, that probably would also be unfair. So with that very long, time-wasting introduction to this, I will talk about some of the things that really make it work great. Okay, so we've got the bustling strings, similar to the approach that I had before, divided into 3 separate parts. That's kind of nice. The pizzicato, keeping time, along with the clarinets and cor anglais. Also very, very cool. And nice how that turns into this sort of more emergent kind of crescendo here, right? So it's still keeping time, pushing into the next chord, right? And then melodically, pretty straightforward to start off with. Flutes, glockenspiel, oboes, and I love the harmonization here in the oboes. It's very effective. Now this is kind of like the little master stroke here. This sort of kind of idea here. And just a little, once again, horns joining in and just giving that little insinuating push right here. So, I mean, just very, very cool idea. And just the right amount of trombones coming in here as the music descends a little bit, and it needs a little bit more support underneath. But notice the melodic style, the accompaniment style, it all stays the same. And the other shame about this particular evaluation, just being so short, is that like I said before, Tristan kind of thinks ahead and plans ahead, and his like the scope of his orchestration can be very kind of calculated in a more like symphonically orchestrated way. Do you know what I mean with like that the orchestration itself develops over time? Which is also something that I do in my own orchestration. I appreciate it in another orchestrator. Rather than kind of just going for different flashy effects one after the other, right? Which is also really a fun thing to do too, and just like throw caution to the winds. But there's a very roundabout way of saying that the first 2 screens of this particular evaluation do not necessarily show the more intriguing, bigger parts of the orchestration. So you might have to go back to the Facebook page, or maybe see if Tristan makes his own video or whatever of this piece. But with that, let's go look at the second page. Now here on page 2, we're seeing kind of a just, very familiar tutti built out of strings and winds, and just keeping it pretty much balanced all the way through. We've got we got like our octave flutes and octave clarinets forming a sort of a triple octave right in there, which goes an octave above what the violins are doing. The violins and the violins and the viola plus cello, right? That's 1 octave in there, and then the double basses get thrown in lower down. And then the oboe comes in, doubles the flute, and so on. We got the piccolo kind of cresting over the top there. So like we've seen some of this orchestration approach in other arrangements, but it's still still very nicely and clearly done, and giving certain groups time to breathe. Other ones, they can just they can deal with playing 5 bars in a row. Maybe take a breath, like right here. But yeah, and this is nicely done. I like the little kind of snarly muted note here on trumpet, first trumpet, just sort of setting up, the transition back to the original idea. So yeah, I mean, but just it's not just that this is like typical to some ideas that we're seeing shared, but it's almost like epitomizes. Do you know what I mean? Including my own. I would throw my own orchestration into that. It just really has a very, just like basically one of the best ways possible to do that familiar approach. Okay. This, like, I love this trill and then the leap up to the F. That's kind of fun. And some other things in it. But like other than that, I don't have a whole lot to say about this. And boy, I wish that I could turn the next page and just move on from that. But at this point, you can hear the sound of my cat scratching his scratching post in the background. He's getting very impatient for dinner, and so is everybody else here. So with that, I will sign off for the E evaluations of these 2019 Orchestration Challenge entries. And just saying that like all of these entries were really, really fun, and there's a spark in all of these entries that I'm getting, and it's just wonderful to see the different approaches, the different the different parts of the road that each orchestrator is on, and like what is the view from that place in the road. And that just is really wonderful to me, and I feel it really brings this community together of orchestrators on the internet, right? And it's just really great to provide that for everybody and to be part of it myself. And I'll see you really soon with the next group of evaluations. Thanks everybody so much.